Hey folks, welcome back to SCP Explained. Sorry if I seem a little out of it today. Truth be told, I've been having real trouble sleeping lately. Perhaps it's because I spend so much time pouring through the files of the SCP Foundation archive. Also, I've been catching up on the West Wing. There's plenty of creatures, entities, objects, and tales that are very effective at making you lose sleep, but none quite as effective as SCP-966. Grab yourself a pot of coffee and prop your eyelids open with some matchsticks or tape, because you need to stay alert if you want to survive this one. Though when you get on the wrong side of SCP-966, I'm sorry to tell you that your chances of survival are extremely low. And after experiencing its primary anomalous effects, the question of how long you'll even want to survive will become disturbingly prescient. Like many of our explorations into the living nightmares that the SCP Foundation deals with on a daily basis, the best way to experience exactly what SCP-966 can do is to take a look at a case study regarding one of its many unfortunate victims. In this case, that victim is a man named Terry Hallberg from New Mexico. In another life, perhaps Terry would have been an ideal candidate for a junior researcher position at the SCP Foundation. He was a scientific-minded truth seeker whose interests lied in the more esoteric fields of study, namely ghosts and aliens. Proving the existence of life in the stars and the supernatural in general was something he considered to be his life's work. This is why he moved to New Mexico, home of Roswell, and widely considered to be the UFO capital of the United States in the first place. There, he'd perform experiments on a wide range of bizarre phenomenon, from exploring haunted houses to obsessively watching the sky for any anomalous activity. He'd become a bigwig in his niche online paranormal investigation community, and his posts on the somewhat infamous Parawatch forum always garnered plenty of attention. But Terry wanted more. He wasn't in it for the fame, or the money, or the legions of insatiable paranormal investigator groupies. He was a true believer. He wanted a close, first-hand experience with the supernatural, and that was exactly what he was about to get, in addition to a very harsh lesson about being careful what you wish for. It began when he got called out to Albuquerque for a strange case of cattle mutilation. For those who don't frequent the Parawatch forums quite as often as Terry, cattle mutilation is the most common nickname for the phenomenon of large livestock, usually cows, being found dead with unusual mutilation patterns on their corpses. While the particulars of what exactly this means varies from believer to believer, with theories ranging from aliens to black helicopters, it is widely accepted across all branches of paranormal enthusiasts that when cattle are being mutilated, something very strange is afoot. Terry arrived at the ranch, and with the application of a little cash to grease the appropriate palms, he was able to conduct a recorded interview with the rancher. He was a weathered man in his early 60s, with a somewhat frantic demeanor and profoundly tired eyes. When Terry asked him if he'd experienced any unusual phenomenon in the days leading up to the cattle mutilation incident, he was surprisingly forthcoming about the hellish conditions he'd been experiencing lately. The strange experiences had been going on for several days now. It all started when the rancher noticed that a number of his cows weren't sleeping. This isn't the easiest thing to spot in a cow, because cattle engage in what is known as polyphasic sleep, where instead of sleeping for one prolonged period like humans typically do, they sleep in small intervals throughout a 24-hour period. Cows can even sleep standing up for periods of light rest, but during REM sleep, which all mammals need for healthy functioning, they lay down just like us. The problem was, in the last several days, many of the rancher's cows hadn't slept at all. It was after this that the rancher seemingly began to have bizarre paranormal experiences himself. It began with a general sense of unease and dread, which was soon followed by a sense of severe insomnia that had left him completely unable to sleep for the past 2 days. During this period, things had gotten worse. He'd experienced strange noises around his home, footsteps, what sounded like hushed voices, and occasionally even what could only be identified as a low, croaking growl. But it wasn't just noises. There was also physical evidence of some kind of intrusion. Items had been knocked over or moved. At one point, a glass of water, which had been centralized on a stable surface, had somehow fallen off the edge and shattered. The old rancher, with a trembling voice, even stated that he'd seen things moving in the corners of his eyes. Figures, shapes, little green men. And then, the cattle mutilation spree began. It may have sounded morbid, but Terry had to use everything in his power to stop himself from smiling ear to ear. While this was a terrifying experience for the rancher, for Terry, this was an absolutely textbook case of paranormal experience. And here he was, the very first person to document it all. It could be the next Skinwalker Ranch or Rendlesham Forest incident, and his name would forever be attached to it. He asked the rancher if he could see the cow's body, and the rancher obliged. Whatever had caused this, alien, ghost, or otherwise, had really done a number on this cow. Good portions of its abdomen had been torn away, with evidence of what appeared to be biting and clawing. This poor beast had been eaten alive. While exploring the wounds with a magnifying glass, a scalpel, and a large pair of tweezers, Terry discovered something incredible. Something frankly unprecedented for a cattle mutilation case. A piece of evidence left behind directly by whatever had perpetrated this act of gruesome violence. A long, thin, and exceedingly sharp claw, around 12 centimeters in length and broken at one end. New Mexico's large predators included mountain lions, black bears, bobcats, and coyotes, and this claw was nothing like any of those. In fact, it was nothing like Terry had ever seen before. Was this his big moment? Had he discovered evidence of an entirely new supernatural creature or a specimen of extraterrestrial life? He was practically vibrating with excitement about this new discovery. After thanking and paying the rancher again, Terry took some photos, gathered some more samples, and left. He had everything he needed to conduct a groundbreaking investigation into the supernatural. Just wait until the folks on Parawatch heard about this. In all his excitement, as he drove back home from the ranch, he never once stopped to consider what he might be bringing back with him. But really, in the end, it didn't even matter. From the moment he stepped onto that ranch, Terry Hallberg was already doomed. He just didn't know it yet. He arrived home and began to record all of his information onto one master document. He also began obsessively assembling outside research, hoping to find similar cases that he could add to this emerging pattern. It was a mix of phenomenon from both hauntings and alien encounters. Could this possibly be some form of alien ghost? The dream find of every paranormal investigator. Terry had to still his racing heart as the possibilities bombarded his mind. He could have been working with the paranormal find of the century here. In fact, he was so excited by all of this, he didn't even realize that he worked through the entire night. He didn't sleep a wink. After all, how could you, when such important research needed to be done? The burst of nocturnal energy felt like a godsend. The next night, not so much. In the meantime, Terry had compiled his information together enough to present it to his esteemed paranormal colleagues on the Parawatch forums. They were startled and amazed by what they were seeing and hearing, especially the taped interview with the rancher and the mysterious claw. One of Terry's closest associates, who went by the username John Station, pulled up a similar bizarre case of a Los Angeles hiker who died in the hills. In the days before his death, his family and friends reported him complaining about insomnia and experiencing an increasing state of paranoia and distress. He started taking long walks across remote trails in hopes of tiring himself out enough to finally get some sleep, but that time never came. When his corpse was found, it was mauled and half-eaten. Everyone assumed that a mountain lion had killed him, and other scavengers had fed on him before his body was found. But now, Terry wasn't so sure. The more they looked into it, the more they found strange and unpleasant deaths connected to people suffering from what seemed like severe insomnia. Despite its debilitating effects, the only type of insomnia that directly causes death is the exceedingly rare genetic condition fatal familial insomnia, which couldn't account for the sheer number of deaths the Parawatch team were finding. In their minds, there was only one reasonable conclusion. The deaths weren't the result of the insomnia itself, but whatever was causing it. It was only then that Terry noticed his own inability to sleep, and his previous excitement was gradually replaced with panic. At first, he tried to keep it all in proportion, knowing that it's easy to invent things to fear when you're in uncharted territory. But as the days passed and the sleep never came, his worry became unassailable. Terry knew that he hadn't just discovered a new paranormal phenomenon, he was becoming one of its victims. He became increasingly paranoid over the next few days, taking constant EVP readings from around his apartment in hopes of detecting whatever was around him. There were strange noises, frightening noises. He just knew it. But little did poor Terry know, there was a very good reason he couldn't detect his tormentors. While he had been in his apartment for days now, he had no hope of ever seeing them. The human eye's spectrum of visible light is around 380 to 750 nanometers, but the monsters who deprived him of his ability to sleep existed somewhere around 900. They were entirely undetectable to the human eye, and they were waiting for their latest meal. As the insomnia grew worse, Terry received some frightening news. That rancher who he'd spoken to a few days before was found dead on his property, with severe injuries comparable to that of a wild animal attack. Just like his cattle, and just like all the other strange cases the Parawatch Forum had found, first the insomnia, then the frightening paranormal experiences, and then Terry felt something warm and wet trickling down the back of his neck. He probably would have realized it was his own blood if a 20-centimeter claw, just like the one he had pulled out of the dead cow, hadn't just pierced his brainstem. Terry Hallberg had finally gotten what he wanted, a first-hand experience with the supernatural, and all he had to do was die. But in his defense, being saved from SCP-966, a whole species of monsters known as the Sleep Killers, is almost worse than being killed by them. When they release their deadly energy pulse, their primary anomalous effect, which induces sleeplessness on anyone or anything in their immediate 20-meter radius, the effects are permanent. They essentially induce fatal insomnia, and your only options are to die by their claws or live long enough to see your own body and mind give out from the horrible effects of true sleep deprivation. They travel in pairs, and because of their invisibility, you never know when they're lurking around you, waiting to rob you of your sleep and then your life. The Foundation currently has 4 specimens in containment, but believe us, there are a lot more out there, and they're hungry. Sleep tight, if you can. Everyone has bad dreams. Whether they're about unconscious memories, showing up to school in your underwear, or a man in a stripy sweater with a spiky glove and a serious moisturizing problem, nightmares are never far from us, a common occurrence as part of the human experience, and they can happen to anyone. Of course, working for the SCP Foundation means being faced with actual nightmares, not only in the middle of the night, but on a day-to-day basis. Giant unkillable lizards with pure hatred for humanity, ancient eldritch beings with enough cosmic power to wipe out entire dimensions, and a species of buses with gigantic insect legs that feed on human beings. Needless to say, the researchers and operatives that find themselves employed by the SCP Foundation come face to face with some pretty horrific creatures, enough to give anyone sleepless nights. This naturally begs the question, what could possibly scare the workers of the SCP Foundation? What could the Foundation possibly have nightmares about? Well, they don't really have a name for him, just a designation, SCP-990. Multiple members of Foundation staff have all made reports of witnessing the same entity. After all, when you deal with dangerous cognito hazards for a living, it's worth taking every unusual occurrence seriously, instead of just relying on the old "it's just a dream" excuse. Anyone from doctors and research personnel to mobile task force operatives and those working as anomaly guarding security, every person working for the Foundation is at risk of an unwanted encounter with SCP-990. The reports are all consistent. They all describe a man, seemingly a human being. This figure always seems to appear dressed in a business suit, but not like you might see a modern CEO or a Wall Street stockbroker wearing. Instead, SCP-990's sense of fashion seems to be at least a few decades out, and he seems to favor wearing clothing more in line with the style of the Cold War era. Wait, that can't be it, right? The big bad boogeyman that terrorizes the dreams of the SCP Foundation staff is just a man in a suit? What is he, an IRS agent? Well, while SCP-990 might not be all that scary to look at when compared to other frightening anomalies like the haunting beaked visage of the Plague Doctor, or the unknowable horror that is SCP-096, it's not the way he looks that's terrifying. It is the ominous warnings that he carries with him. What is interesting is that while most dreams are usually our brain's way of processing our memories or real-world experiences and anxieties, SCP-990 seems to have no recorded existence beyond what has been reported by staff. He seems to exclusively exist within the dreams of Foundation personnel, with absolutely none of these people having witnessed or encountered the suit-wearing man in the real world. If there is somewhere out there among the 7 billion people on planet Earth a man who resembles SCP-990,
then the Foundation has been unsuccessful in tracking him down. What's more is that there has never been a single report from outside of the Foundation, not one civilian or even any member of another group of interest, that anyone else has ever had a dream involving SCP-990. For years now, he's been cropping up exclusively in the nightmares of Foundation personnel, but was first discovered a number of years ago after several agents began to discuss the fact that they all had experienced similar dreams, all revolving around a mysterious man in a Cold War-era business suit. But then, he finally became known to the higher-ups at the Foundation after one peculiar incident. An agent had failed to report to his assigned post at the right time, and from that moment on, things would never be the same again. After scouring the Foundation facility for this missing agent, when fellow members of personnel found him, he was fast asleep in his quarters. Doesn't seem too unusual, right? After all, working at the SCP Foundation has got to be pretty hard going, with some horrendous overtime hours, so maybe the agent just needed to catch up on some sleep by taking a quick nap before the start of his shift. Then again, 18 whole hours is one hell of a long nap. That's right, the man had been unconscious for 18 hours. When they found him, fellow Foundation staff were unable to awaken the sleeping agent, his body having entered some form of short-term coma. Unsure if he would ever wake again, medical personnel had the agent moved to the sickbay on site, where he was placed under surveillance and continued his long sleep. After almost 2 whole days and an uninterrupted 40-hour period of sustained sleep, the agent finally awoke. He was agitated, erratic. Clearly something had rattled him pretty severely. The agent dashed out of his bed in the medical bay and began frantically running through the corridors of the Foundation facility, screaming and babbling about the impending end of the entire world. Eventually, medics were able to restrain the man, injecting him with powerful sedatives to relax him long enough for them to secure him. Yet somehow the agent's bodily functions remained in a heightened state even after he was sedated. His heart was beating at a dangerously accelerated rate, and his blood pressure was spiking to quite an alarming degree. Now, we may not be medical experts, but we can guarantee that high blood pressure and an elevated heart rate are rarely ever good signs. Then again, neither is being asleep and unable to wake for 40 solid hours. As you may have already guessed, when he finally calmed down, the agent described a dream that revolved around a man dressed in a business suit that seemed to match the styles of the Cold War era. In other words, SCP-990. But you see, it's not like the mysterious man trapped the agent in this 40-hour dream just to torture him. There was no pulling the agent through the center of his mattress, causing a volcanic eruption of blood to splatter up to the ceiling. SCP-990 didn't wrap any bedsheets around the agent's neck, or slash at him using a glove with a blade at the end of each finger. Instead, all SCP-990 did during the course of the agent's dream was deliver a message. Well, actually, it was more of a warning than anything else. After he had awoken and calmed down from his prior outburst, the agent was being evaluated by a Foundation doctor. During this evaluation, the agent was able to describe, in the most acute, precise detail imaginable, a chilling sequence of events. Something that was so accurate that it could only have been true, instead of just an inconsequential dream or a fabricated made-up story. The agent was describing exactly how the world was going to end. Not a single detail was omitted. The exact times and dates, the tipping of every domino on the geopolitical landscape that would ultimately lead to annihilation. SCP-990 had appeared in the agent's dream to describe exactly how, at some point in time, a series of events would culminate in multiple tactical nuclear warheads being launched. These deadly weapons of mass destruction would head straight for targets in Central Europe and Eastern Asia, seeming to imply that the missiles were being launched by the United States of America. The resulting devastation of the nuclear payload would wipe out almost the entirety of the human race, exterminating around 98% of the planet's population. Society would collapse on a global scale, and the world would be rendered a barren, inhospitable wasteland, ravaged by radioactive fallout. Every detail of this impending apocalypse was relayed to the agent by SCP-990, including exactly who and what would trigger the initial chain of events destined to end in total destruction of Earth. Deciding to take the mysterious suited man's message seriously, the SCP Foundation dispatched one of its elite mobile task forces to eliminate that initial threat, removing the thing that would topple the first domino. While the crisis was averted and the world saved, the agent who first reported his encounter with SCP-990 died, suffering symptoms resembling severe shock. Of course, just because you managed to stop one approaching apocalypse doesn't mean that there won't be others. In fact, when you think about it, that's the scariest thing about SCP-990. It's not that he appears in Foundation personnel's dreams, it's that his work is never done. He always brings with him a new warning of a new disaster on the horizon. If anything, the ripples caused by preventing one of these crises only create another to deal with. Since this initial incident, now designated as Event 990-07, SCP-990 has made a number of similarly ominous warnings through the nightmares of other members of the SCP Foundation. Any one of this business suit-wearing omen's warnings come with almost 100% certainty rate. He can foresee the future without any margin of error, successfully predicting the exact dates, times, and causes of the deaths of multiple doctors working for the Foundation. Even the destruction of a noted facility, known as Watch Station Epsilon 38, was foretold by an appearance of SCP-990. Of course, theories about who or what exactly this man is are common, but with no clear, definite answer to speak of. It is currently up in the air if this entity is some sort of guardian angel, helping the SCP Foundation protect humanity from their own downfall and guiding us all to safety. Or he could be a visitor from an infinite number of potential futures, projecting himself back in time to avert whatever course of action led to the end of the world. The staff at the SCP Foundation are encouraged to come forward if they ever have a nocturnal encounter with SCP-990, with one doctor even believing that the man has a physical body somewhere out there in the real world. During one dream with SCP-990 in it, a Foundation doctor was able to conduct a complete interview with the man. Now, we all know that it can be pretty tricky to recall the details of a dream after waking up, but this particular doctor claimed to have an almost impeccable memory. It is unclear how exactly this doctor was able to converse so clearly with SCP-990, but with so many people working for the Foundation, perhaps it was only a matter of time before the man in the suit found one capable of lucid dreaming. After commencement of this dream interview, when asked for his name, SCP-990 responded with Tony, as if he pulled the name from thin air. When the doctor asked if this was his real name, SCP-990 claimed that a person should have the right to be called whatever they wish to be called, before changing his mind and asking to be called Richard instead. The doctor pressed on, asking the man why he had been delivering threats to Foundation personnel through their dreams. SCP-990 seemed confused by this. Then the doctor rebutted by accusing the Dreamwalker of murdering the agent, the one who had first reported his encounter with SCP-990. Hearing this, the entity explained that the Foundation had the wrong impression of him, claiming that he wasn't the bad guy. Upon mention of a bad guy being involved, the doctor's next course of action was naturally to ask who this might be. And then SCP-990 said something even stranger. It was the designation of another SCP, but not one that the Foundation had ever encountered before. There didn't even exist any anomaly under the number that the mysterious Dream Man had given. There is no SCP with that designation, and there won't be for some time, the doctor argued, growing ever more confused and agitated. Well, of course not, SCP-990 replied. She hasn't even been born yet, much less classified by your Foundation. When asked if this was another prediction of an impending disaster, yet another threat that could end the entire world, SCP-990 simply told the doctor, "This is your wake-up call." Since then, no one is certain who or what this future anomaly could be, whether she has since been contained by the Foundation or if that is still yet to come. The sad part about our dreams is that they only ever really offer us a look backwards, memories and experiences all warped in our sleeping brains. None of us can look forward. Nobody knows exactly what the future holds. Well, none of us except SCP-990, that is. It has been a long time since the Foundation designated SCP-990. If that prophesized nightmare of an SCP has been born and designated since then, what do you think she is? Let us know down in the comments.
Can a thought be infectious? Is it possible that transferring an idea can happen as easily as catching the common cold? Someone gets it, then transmits it to another person who then passes it on to someone else, and so on. Imagine for a moment that information is a disease. We can't see information or feel it. We can read it in books or on the internet, but actually seeing it or feeling it inside our heads is impossible. So what if something could taint the information we absorb? Use it to slip its way undetected into your mind, then pass from you to your friends, your family, your coworkers. How would you know it was there? And how could you prevent it from getting into your head? Perhaps it's time you were introduced to SCP-3002. Over its many years of studying and containing anomalous beings and entities, the SCP Foundation has encountered a number of creatures with memetic abilities. If you are unfamiliar with the term, memetic usually refers to data or information that has been manipulated in order to influence or subconsciously change a person's behavior. This can take any form, from text and images to spoken phrases and other audio. For example, a form of memetic influence we have all experienced at some point is product placement. If you ever watched a character in a movie or on TV using a certain product, then that may have made you decide that you want to buy that same product for yourself. That idea was planted in your head by something you saw and had a subliminal influence on your behavior. SCP-3002 is one such entity that uses memetic stimuli for its own nefarious purposes. Some anomalies, like SCP-2440, use memetic information to spread knowledge of themselves among human beings, getting stronger the more people learn about it. SCP-3002, on the other hand, is information. This entity is a thought, a living, sentient thought, with a number of abilities that allow it to influence the minds of human beings. It is hard to picture a thought, let alone one that is alive. Since we can't see information, the idea of something so abstract having a tangible form boggles the mind. SCP-3002 is capable of shapeshifting, and while it does not possess its own consistent shape, the entity is able to transform itself into the form of any piece of information it chooses. Existing as pure information means that it is intangible to any beings that possess physical bodies. But what makes SCP-3002 a threat to everyone at the Foundation and earned this entity its Keter classification is its power to manipulate a person's mind or memories, allowing SCP-3002 to directly enter human minds. Moving at the speed that thoughts can travel through the brain, this entity is almost impossible to kill or kept contained. SCP-3002 can spread like a sickness through a human population, attacking new minds and taking control of its victims. According to the Foundation's research, there is only one way to remove the influence of SCP-3002. Anyone that comes under the control of this entity has to undergo complex, intricate, and risky brain surgery in order to physically remove the entity from their minds. However, the Foundation considers this method to be impractical, time-consuming, cost-ineffective, and is rendered utterly pointless if SCP-3002 has infected too much of a subject's mind. So instead, in order to prevent the spread of SCP-3002's influence, all Foundation personnel are instructed to terminate any person contaminated by this living thought. This order is extended to that individual's family, friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances. Given that SCP-3002 can take the form of any information it chooses, written words, a sound, even a telepathic signal, anyone even remotely linked to someone the entity infects has to be destroyed to stop any potential spread. If you or anyone you knew were to come into contact with SCP-3002, the entity would be able to take control of your entire consciousness. All your memories would be ripe for the entity's picking. SCP-3002 is able to sift through your temporal lobe where memories are stored, and can not only destroy and delete an infected person's memories, but can also create false memories to replace them. And all the while, you would be completely unaware that this was happening to you, stripped of all your natural survival instincts while SCP-3002 runs riot in your brain. There is currently no known limit to how much of someone's mind SCP-3002 is able to mimic, rewrite, alter, or remove. When the entity alters one of your memories, that memory will become an additional instance of SCP-3002. In other words, it can implant itself in every moment of your life, making itself a part of everything you remember about your own personal past and even the parts you can't. Once SCP-3002 has spread itself to every piece of information stored inside your brain, the next stage of infection begins, and SCP-3002 is able to take full control of a person's body. Much like before, this could be happening to you without you ever being consciously aware of it. Usually this doesn't come to much, and infected victims will carry on their day-to-day lives, acting no different to how they would normally. That is until SCP-3002 detects a new target that hasn't been infected yet. When this happens, any people previously exposed to SCP-3002 will collectively seek out the uncontaminated individual, capturing them. Once this happens, SCP-3002's infected army will force their new victim to join them. The SCP Foundation considers SCP-3002 to be extremely hostile and a major threat to their organization and the world at large. Due to SCP-3002 being uncontainable and able to infinitely adapt, it has evaded capture or termination for a considerable length of time. Having the ability to spread among human beings via the information we share with each other, speech, texts, emails, phone calls, any information at all, means that potentially any and all information could contain SCP-3002. According to calculations of the Foundation's top researchers, 78% of humanity may be under the influence of SCP-3002 without any awareness that they have been infected. While dangerous and unstoppable, SCP-3002 doesn't operate purely on instinct. It doesn't infect as many minds as it can just because it knows no other way. Everything that SCP-3002 does is a premeditated, calculated decision with one nefarious intention, one goal: to destroy the SCP Foundation from the inside out by killing or infecting every member of personnel. Believe it or not, SCP-3002 didn't begin life as a sentient, infectious thought. In fact, SCP-3002 was once a person, a regular human being like you or I. She even had a name, Lily Veselka. It is widely believed that Lily Veselka became what we now know as SCP-3002 due to the actions of the Foundation itself. Since becoming SCP-3002, Lily seems to have been searching for any information she can find regarding a highly secret operation conducted by the SCP Foundation known as Project Lethe. As well as this, she appears to have an interest in a number of Foundation research facilities, including Site E and an off-the-books facility located in Ukraine's Yuseninsky National Park. This is potentially where SCP-3002 was first created. If any of this is to be believed, then it would certainly explain SCP-3002's noticeable aggression towards the Foundation, and its attempts to infect its personnel as an act of revenge. After the project that turned Lily into a living thought, SCP-3002 was later encountered by the Foundation in its current form in South Rock Penitentiary. This prison, located near Lafayette, Indiana, was first visited by one Dr. Daryl Lloyd, one of the SCP Foundation's researchers. The prison psychiatrist, a woman named Dr. Suzanne Fairbank, was the first to notice the effects of SCP-3002 contamination on a number of South Rock Penitentiary's inmates. During sessions with her, several of these prisoners had mentioned an identical memory to Dr. Fairbank. The description of the memory from each of the inmates followed the same structure. The prisoner remembered taking a long walk through a forest with their best friend at the time. This detail, the best friend, is most likely SCP-3002 herself, imitating a figure from each inmate's own childhood memories. At some point in this false shared memory, all the prisoners recalled having an argument with their friend. It was later learned that the figure was Lily Veselka, approaching infected individuals in their memories to ask them questions about the project that had turned her into SCP-3002, often demanding to know, "What do you know about me?" or "Has the project finished?" The Foundation began to investigate this bizarre instance of shared anomalous memory after Dr. Suzanne Fairbank shared her findings on an internet message board, describing what she had witnessed to other psychology experts. At first, Dr. Lloyd, the Foundation's researcher sent to South Rock to gather more information, labeled the situation as low-priority research. Given SCP-3002's ability to adapt and take the form of any information, it was able to avoid immediate detection by the SCP Foundation, and the full extent of Lily's abilities remained hidden. Dr. Lloyd originally classified SCP-3002 as safe, believing it was a little more than a shared childhood memory that the South Rock inmates had described. At first, those that had been infected with this collective memory were able to recount it with perfect accuracy. But as Dr. Lloyd continued to interview and test the affected inmates, the details became scarier.
and the memory became less and less defined the further the SCP Foundation looked into it. Perhaps Lily recognized the Foundation's presence and remembered that they were the ones responsible for turning her into a sentient mimetic entity without physical form, and started hiding her tracks. Maybe she was biding herself time, hiding herself away in the minds of the infected prisoners until the time was right. Little did Dr. Lloyd realize at the time just how far SCP-3002's influence had already spread. Lily wasn't just in the inmates' heads, but almost all of the prison staff too, who were now spreading her further and further without even realizing it. Thinking that SCP-3002 would be easy to contain, Dr. Lloyd had the Foundation administer amnestics to all the infected inmates. Amnestics are memory-altering drugs that the SCP Foundation uses to prevent any information about SCPs becoming known to the public. When dealing with mimetic anomalies like SCP-3002 or SCP-2440, amnestics can be particularly useful in removing a person's memories about a mimetic SCP. Dr. Lloyd hoped that this would be the case at South Rock, still thinking SCP-3002 was nothing more than an anomalous shared memory that could be removed. However, removing the false memory that Lily had implanted in the prisoners would not remove her from all their other memories. Additionally, one of the infected inmates was not given amnestics and was brought back to the Foundation for observation. From there, SCP-3002's influence had been able to spread like a sickness through the ranks of the Foundation's own personnel, without their knowledge or detection. Every person whose mind SCP-3002 is able to reach becomes an unwitting carrier for the infectious living thought. It is unknown exactly how many of the SCP Foundation's members are under the control of SCP-3002, granting Lily access to the wealth of secret information and plans that the Foundation keeps hidden. It doesn't matter what level of clearance someone would need to view it. If it's information, it's another way for SCP-3002 to spread. And information, as we know, can take any form, be it a written file, a spoken conversation, or even an informative YouTube video. Now tell me again about the time that we took a walk together in the forest. When it comes to anomalous religions, the SCP Foundation is no stranger to them. The weird, wild, and utterly incomprehensible belief systems that populate the world of the anomalous might seem too crazy and dangerous to participate in on paper, but if there's anything that brings people together, it's the power of faith and belief. Take, for example, the Mechanites, a massive religious following with various sects located across the globe, united in their belief that body modification using technology is the pathway to worship their god, Mechane, the broken god, who will one day reassemble the lost parts of its body and usher the universe into a new age of technological superiority. Or the cult-like Children of the Scarlet King, who worship a brutal ancient entity known as the Scarlet King, who exists as a dangerous idea, unable to be accurately described or cataloged by contemporary science, separating the ages of modernity and antiquity and invigorating its followers to commit horrible acts in the name of their king. But if you're a longtime viewer of SCP Explained, then chances are you've heard of the Broken God and the Scarlet King, arguably two of the most popular anomalous religions. So today we're going to be talking about one that you might not have heard about, Fifism. Fifism is a lot more difficult to explain, because instead of a central prevailing deity and strict belief system that unites Fithists, the religion is defined more by its nonsensical, illogical, and absurd state of mind that it imposes on its followers. Fifism is all-consuming, a mindset that is often transmitted through mimetic means, such as books that contain rambling paragraphs of surreal imagery, and platitudes that are dispersed among unsuspecting populations by Fithists. Those who read Fithist literature often succumb to Fithist beliefs themselves, losing their mind and delving into a strange world centered around cosmic starfish and the number 5, where nothing makes sense, but it doesn't matter, because you've now been enlightened, and to the Fithist zealot, it all makes sense. The Foundation had to deal with a dangerous piece of Fithist literature in the past. SCP-1425, the book titled Star Signals, was a self-help book with mimetic properties that nearly consumed the minds of the entire world, becoming a national bestseller that forced the Foundation to take extreme measures to purge it from public knowledge and destroy every remaining copy. Just listen to this excerpt from SCP-1425, which illustrates the strange, mind-altering Fifthist doctrine. Now, imagine that the place where your desires are made real has a name. It's called the Fifth World. The Fifth World is the cosmos twisted around you into the shape you will wish for. It has never been, but you can make it so. If the current world is like a tight-collared suit, then the Fifth World is like a flowing robe that allows complete freedom of movement. You will never truly move before you move in the Fifth World. You'll feel like a square on a piece of paper who has only just made about up and down. When dealing with Fifthism, that's the kind of strangeness you're guaranteed to encounter. The Foundation's operation to get SCP-1425 under control took weeks and didn't work out as smoothly as they hoped, proving the religion as a force to be reckoned with, and definitely not one to take lightly. But the story of star signals, SCP-1425, is one for another day. Now that you have a crash course in Fifthism, we can get to the real reason you're here. SCP-2456, Dreams of a Broken World. What exactly is SCP-2456? Well, if you guessed that it's Fifthist, you would be correct. But considering what we know about Fifthism, that could mean anything. SCP-2456 discovery dates back to a Foundation operation in Eugene, Oregon, where Foundation operatives raided the hideout of individuals belonging to the Serpent's Hand, a paramilitary resistance organization united by their belief that the world should embrace the anomalous. The Serpent's Hand has been heavily critical of groups like the Global Occult Coalition and the SCP Foundation, their containment, and especially their destruction of anomalous objects and entities. In an ideal world, for a member of the Hand, anomalies coexist with the world we know. It's an idealistic picture, but their antagonism against the Foundation has painted a serious target on their back, subjecting them to frequent ambushes and raids on their hideouts. And that's exactly what happened inside the abandoned warehouse where SCP-2456 was discovered. The Foundation sent a highly trained mobile task force, a squad named Bookworms, after one of the remaining copies of SCP-1425, the Fifthist self-help book, Star Signals, which was supposedly stowed away inside the warehouse. Upon entry, the operatives stumbled upon a Serpent's Hand hideout, and a firefight between Hand members and Foundation operatives ensued. The task force suffered minor casualties, but they managed to secure a hold over the warehouse after a brief struggle. Inside, they not only found a copy of Star Signals, but several other anomalous artifacts that the Hand was using to further its goals. During the inventory, another curious object was found, a wooden crate with a label that read, Fifth Cycle of the Mind, stamped onto its side. When opened, the Foundation uncovered dozens more copies of Star Signals, as well as numerous other Fifthist texts, and a weathered note signed by an unknown individual that read, George, this is our latest catch. Please burn these as soon as you can at your discretion. Don't let the idiots find this. At the very bottom of the crate, several manuscripts were discovered that contained information about a then unknown Fifthist anomaly, involving a strange variation of the belief system, which the Foundation immediately began researching. The manuscripts pointed towards the existence of an abstract theology that has existed for centuries that, when preached by its believers, transmits a mimetic virus. This religion is varying in characteristics, but is distinguishable by several qualities, such as starting out as a variation of an existing theology, making frequent use of the number 5 in its written doctrine, and revolving around Godhead figures that are synonymous with the Sun, who are believed to bring about a future apocalypse. On top of those, written works make mention of a non-existent sea, frequent references to celestial objects, the appearance of hands as a religious symbol, and the belief that the sun has great mathematical significance and importance. If all of that sounds confusing to you, congratulations, you're immune to Fifthism. If it sounds appealing, well, you might just be affected by SCP-2456. SCP-2456 is a mimetic parasite, transmitted from one person to another by being exposed to the theology we described above, which the Foundation labeled SCP-2456-1. Those affected by SCP-2456 show an affinity towards astrology, astronomy, and pseudoscience in general, as well as an increased proficiency in speaking foreign languages. There's also prolonged episodes of psychosis, paranoia, and dissociative identity disorder, as well as a high attention span for geometrical shapes, patterns, and sequences involving, you guessed it, the number 5. Usually the SCP-2456 parasite will remain dormant for a period of time, but once activated by several stress triggers, the subject afflicted with the anomaly will undergo a mind-altering revelation, falling asleep for a period of 3 to 4 days, experiencing vivid cryptic dreams involving religious prophets and figures from various theologies being executed one by one with a sword, and celestial bodies dancing in the sky. After this long rest, the subject will begin preaching the -1 religion to others, causing the parasite to transmit from one person to another, bringing more and more followers to its cause. And after that, the cycle will repeat. More followers are attracted, more begin preaching, and before you can realize, SCP-2456 has affected a large group of the Foundation. With such an easily transmissible anomaly, it's a wonder the world hadn't been taken over by SCP-2456 a long time ago. But when you consider that Fifithism is already an established belief system, maybe, in a way, it already has. Believers in the religion that those affected by SCP-2456 preach are incredibly violent and aggressive, with their strong feelings growing more and more with every new iteration of the religion over time. Believers usually seek out those who haven't been affected by SCP-2456 and attempt to spread the religion, and if they refuse, murder them. But the Foundation's research has shown that no individual that has been affected by SCP-2456 has ever been successful in inflicting more than 5% of the existing human population. Chalk it up to luck, because Foundation simulations have indicated that a CK-class end-of-the-world scenario would occur if SCP-2456 infection rates exceed over 7%. If you can't tell, that's pretty bad. Not only that, but the Foundation discovered that as the religion evolves over time, it creates a minor reality warping effect, and if left unchecked, can fracture the integrity of space and time at a high enough level. Thankfully, the Foundation has one way to combat SCP-2456. During the period of time directly after an individual wakes up from their prophetic sleep, treating them with high-class amnestics has been discovered to completely rid the individual of the SCP-2456 parasite, bringing them back to their senses. But still, due to the mimetic nature and the high number of suspected infected individuals, the Foundation has found that complete containment of SCP-2456 is not physically possible, at least with the organization's current technology level. Still, that isn't stopping researchers from working tirelessly, trying to develop methods of neutralizing all instances of the parasite in the wild, taking the fight to the internet, and making sure that their web crawlers can quickly scan for keywords related to SCP-2456 on websites and social media databases. If they're found, the Foundation can quickly trace posts to whoever wrote them and bring them to a secure facility for further research. It's never clean work having to abduct civilians from their homes, but in this case, given how dangerous SCP-2456 can be if left unchecked, it might be justified. But how has the religion that SCP-2456 instills in its victims, SCP-2456-1, evolved over the years? The manuscripts that the Foundation uncovered inside the Serpent's Hand hideaway detailed 6 variations of the theology over time. Let's take a look at them. The first variation dates all the way back to 1837. A religion by the name of the God-Worshipping Society, which was a fusion of Confucianism and Catholicism that cropped up in China at the time, spread by Hong Xiuquan, a Chinese revolutionary who led the Taiping Army in rebellion against the Qing dynasty. The stress of having to deal with the political instability of the era resulted in SCP-2456 triggering inside Xiuquan's mind and causing him to preach his variation of the -1 religion to his followers. This furthered the strength of the Taiping Army, allowing them to march through nearly every province of China in retaliation until they achieved their goal. Some accounts of Xiuquan's followers recount them transforming into piles of geological matter, which the Foundation found DNA evidence bonded to sediment in pockets of igneous rock in the area, undoubtedly a result of SCP-2456 reality warping side effects. The second variation was found in ancient Egypt under the name of the Cult of Aten. The progenitor of this variation is unknown, due to how far back it dates, but the person who imposed the will of the cult of Aten the most was then Pharaoh Akhenaten of Amarna, who used his power as head of state to condemn worship of all Egyptian deities other than Aten. The cult of Aten's reign over Egypt resulted in several reality-altering properties, including strange behavior of celestial bodies, feelings of stretched-out, unending days, and the refusal of the sun to set for 5 days, which resulted in a drought along the bank of the Nile. Egyptian star charts from this time display star systems, constellations, and nebulae that do not exist or are depicted incorrectly. The most prominent of these changes include the inclusion of a planet named Nubu, which is described as half of the size of Venus, that would pulsate with light in 5-second intervals. There's that number again. The third variation jumps to the time of the Aztecs, and while little is known about its origins, its impact on Aztec society was enormous. The Aztec deity Tonatiuh was said to be the 5th sun that set in the sky. The Aztecs frequently made sacrifices to Tonatiuh, and the worship of the entity caused a reality-warping effect throughout the empire. The sun and the moon were eclipsed by unknown celestial objects consistently for weeks. Bodies from past sacrifices would reanimate and attack civilians, reaching into their throats and pulling out their hearts. The coasts of the empire suffered from glowing red poisons, which killed off fish and caused tissue necrosis in humans, as well as forming large blood clots in the lungs. The fourth variation, the cult of the Supreme Being, was a short-lived religion perpetrated by French philosopher Augustin Robespierre during the time of the French Revolution. Its small longevity meant that the religion didn't garner enough followers to cause intense reality-warping effects, but some anomalous characteristics were still prevalent, such as reports of incorporeal manifestations in the streets of Paris, dimensional shifts in saloons and smoking parlors around the city, and the increased brutality and ruthlessness of the revolutionaries, who imposed a large daily quota of executions. The fifth variation is entirely unknown, most likely to do with the number's significance to the Fifthist belief system. Attempts to access the SCP Foundation files on the fifth incarnation of SCP-2456-1's belief system are met with failure, as the file's data is corrupted. This, however, raises a new question. Maybe this unknown religion is still one that's active today. Maybe the fifth variation of SCP-2456-1 is Fifthism itself, having evolved as a variation of SCP-2456 over the years. That would add a whole new level of danger to Fifthism, as if it got out of hand. The reality-warping effects of being a SCP-2456-based theology would cause destruction to the fabric of reality itself. The sixth variation is similar to the fifth, with its files being similarly corrupted in the Foundation's databases, and all information on it being entirely unknown, save for a single readable sentence, which states that the main perpetrator, the prophet of this sixth variation of SCP-2456-1, is still at large today, remaining a threat to the world. Knowing that this virus can affect large swaths of the population, as it did in the Aztec and Egyptian empires, the Foundation remains extremely cautious of SCP-2456, especially with the added risk of Fifthism being prevalent in the anomalous world, and the unknown sixth religion still at large. Also discovered inside the Serpent's Hand warehouse were several manuscripts from the various religions that SCP-2456 influenced. Scriptures from the cult of Aten, letters written by Robespierre in his journal, and even a text from the Taiping Revolution, labeled The Wisdoms of the Heavenly King. But what did they say? The text source from China describes the story of a prophet who wanted to bring great knowledge to the people beneath him. And so, as the text describes, he followed the smoke, a Fifthist metaphor for reaching enlightenment. He did so by studying alongside a mentor for 5 months, and on the 5th day of the 5th month, he had achieved enlightenment and knew he had a great mission to complete. He roused his subjects, rallying the people who lived in ash and filth to war, attacking with the power of the sun on their side. Those who faced the prophet ran, but the ones who were left understood. On the 5th day they turned into tar, sand, and salt, and the prophet remained victorious. Sound familiar? It's an abridged retelling of Hongji Quan's revolution. The rest of the text describes a parable of a master and a student philosophizing about the stars, with a particular poem that stands out. It reads, 5 spokes of a broken star, 5 elements that forever spar, 5 senses to evoke the mind, 5 pieces slowly unwind. A black moon howling is a vision unworthy of one's sight. A hymn source from the Cult of Aten also makes references to the number 5, and specifically makes mention of the Black Moon. If you're familiar with the SCP Foundation's inner circle, the Overseer Council, then you know that they frequently use the phrase, "Does the Black Moon howl?" as a security measure to access top-secret confidential documents. Its true meaning, however, remains shrouded in mystery. But here you see it connected to SCP-2456. It can't be a coincidence. Robespierre's diary describes an account of the French Revolution, detailing Robespierre's descent into madness that led to the creation of the short-lived cult of the Supreme Being. The revolution descends into brutality, and as Robespierre describes, "The streets run pink with blood and agony," as the cult revels in the bloodshed and ruthlessness. All of this points to a compelling mystery about the true nature of SCP-2456, especially with the connection to the commonly used symbol of the Black Moon in the SCP Foundation. And all of this came to a head on December 21st, 2016, when an unidentifiable audio file was sent to a Foundation researcher that alerted the server's firewalls. The audio file was traced as originating from a cubicle that had been vacant for 6 years, with hardware that had been short-circuited and badly corroded. A portion of the audio file was recovered from the damaged terminal, and the Foundation quickly began to transcribe it. It was the voice of an unknown Foundation employee, who detailed that he had been working with the organization for 2 decades, and that while he had seen horrible things in the past, as he was recording this message he was more terrified than ever before. He was assigned to research SCP-2456, cataloging all the past occurrences of the various religions that had cropped up as a result of the parasite over the years. He had experience in memetics, but the danger of researching SCP-2456 was proving difficult to contend with. Members of the research team were succumbing to SCP-2456, but not only that, they were disappearing too. After one personnel was admitted to an infirmary, the speaker recounted that he would never be able to find them again. The audio continued to play, and the speaker explained that SCP-2456 also carries a potent anti-meme, an idea that causes dramatic reality shifts, often characterized by something being imperceptible and unrecognizable to the human brain. Whenever information about an SCP-2456 religion is read or written about, the anti-meme will enter the subject and slowly erase them from existence, alongside all records and knowledge about the subject. Sometimes, however, corpses and names remained. The speaker detailed how he witnessed his peers slowly disappear. As the file goes on, he descends into typical fifthist ranting, speaking about 5s, following the smoke, and a dream, but he leaves a terrifying message. The Foundation is old, but the world is older. Maybe the Serpent's Hand, with their manuscripts and research on SCP-2456, were attempting to keep the forces of the Fifth King, a mysterious deity the man mentions, at bay. Now inside the hands of the Foundation, these documents will never be destroyed. They will continue to be read and continue to linger in reality. The speaker signs off, ranting more about the Star Signals incident and the fifthest dream that permeates the shadows of all reality. As the speaker states, "Once history is forgotten, it is of course doomed to repeat itself, and the 6th cycle will forevermore echo." Ask yourself a simple question. Is the world around you real? It seems like the answer should be pretty obvious. Of course the world as you know it is real. How else would you be able to interact with it? Perhaps a better question would be this. How much do you trust that the world you know is real? How much do you believe that reality, as you experience it, is constant and cannot be changed by external forces? Now imagine, if you can, an entity to which the very fabric of reality is like clay, able to be shaped and molded at will. Then imagine that this entity, this malicious, twisted, and unknowable horror, has taken a special interest in you. If you can picture such a scenario, then you may as well be standing in the shoes of James Talleyrand,
a Foundation researcher assigned to SCP-3999. Talleyrand could only have imagined what the Foundation kept contained in an airtight cell all the way at the bottom of a kilometer-long shaft, and never expected that this was where his lifeless body would be found. Despite having the entity contained, the Foundation's only knowledge of SCP-3999 came from a text document discovered on Talleyrand's phone after his demise. Even their own records indicated that no such creature ever existed. Why? What could possibly shape reality in such a way that it could hide its own existence from the Foundation? And where was it now? The document on Talleyrand's phone yielded some evidence, seeming to be a long, rambling, and confused account of some sort of battle between a reality-shaping entity and the ill-fated researcher sent to examine it. Unlike many of the Foundation's documents, the entry for SCP-3999 is riddled with contradictions and strike-throughs, a confusing mess of information that makes piecing together the mysteries of Talleyrand's fate all the more difficult. Beneath the strange formatting and uncertainty surrounding SCP-3999 lies the tale of one man's torture for the amusement of an impossibly powerful and eternally sadistic creature. Based on the information available, it appears that SCP-3999 was fixated on Talleyrand. Upon his arrival to the entity's cell, the researcher had no idea how long he would spend in the company of SCP-3999, or that he would never emerge alive. Many SCPs contained by the Foundation require their own specially made prisons in order to hold them and maintain the safety of Foundation staff as well as the outside world. But imagine if an SCP could turn the tables, bending the world around a single member of the Foundation, using all of reality as their own personalized torture chamber. The list of horrors endured by Talleyrand is both exhaustive and incomplete, given the length of time he spent with the creature. Shortly after James Talleyrand was assigned to Site-11A, where SCP-3999 was contained, the entity was somehow able to breach containment and began to twist the world around it in the name of a singular, cruel objective: the torture of James Talleyrand. The creature, while having no physical description, possessed the capability to cause either a CK-class reality restructuring event or a ZK-class end-of-reality event. SCP-3999 was somehow able to both destroy reality itself while simultaneously rebuilding it around its prisoner, researcher Talleyrand. Every creature, person, and machination that SCP-3999 created was done so with the express intention of making Talleyrand suffer horribly over the course of millions of years, according to the researcher's own writings. The exact details of how SCP-3999 tortured Talleyrand are littered throughout the document he was found with, but it is apparent that the entity was able to use its reality-altering abilities to continually revive the man after killing him as a way to prolong his pain. SCP-3999 seemed to be able to use its powers however it pleased, but focused all its attention and actions on causing misery for one man. It simply enjoyed inflicting suffering. One of the examples of the atrocities James Talleyrand suffered at the mercy of a cold, remorseless creature was witnessing the deaths of others. Although they were constructed and controlled by SCP-3999, Talleyrand saw trained Foundation security personnel drag 3 people into the cell. He recognized them instantly as his own family. Talleyrand was made to watch as his mother, father, and sister were executed with a single gunshot to the head by members of the same organization that he was a part of. All of Talleyrand's professional colleagues were also killed in front of him, followed by anyone and everyone that had come into contact with James Talleyrand, including the O5 Council. He was made to watch as they were systematically murdered one by one, all for the enjoyment of SCP-3999. At some point during the creature's torture of Talleyrand, there appears to have been some attempt to contain SCP-3999 within another SCP, SCP-2432, a room within a hotel now owned by the Foundation that appears to compel its guests to write exaggerated positive reviews after staying there. When introduced to SCP-2432, SCP-3999's ability to alter reality seemed to have the effect of creating a dimensional anomaly within the hotel. A crawlspace opened up in SCP-2432, leading to an almost identical room. The front door of this new room, designated SCP-2432-1,
led to an alternate dimension that resembled the hotel housing SCP-2432. The rooms of this new version of the SCP-2432 hotel were a seemingly infinite, endless loop of rooms. This dimension also played host to a number of strange creatures, as uncovered by Foundation research teams that ventured there. Most notably, a creature resembling a male Homo sapien, calling itself Researcher Talaran. This being was dressed in clothing similar to Foundation researchers and appeared nervous and confused when approached by personnel, only to be executed when asked to be told the location of SCP-3999. Later during SCP-3999's 3 million year torture session, James Talaran was interviewed with another doctor working for the Foundation. The interviewing doctor had no recollection of Talaran's assignment to SCP-3999, and both James's involvement with the Foundation and the very existence of SCP-3999 were expunged from the Foundation's database. As Talaran desperately tried to rationalize what was happening to him, he told the interviewer, "I have trouble focusing on things now. I just feel a lot of unease. It's like reality has started to feel less real, if that makes sense." Shortly after, he attempted to ask the doctor for his name and for him to identify which of the Foundation sites they were at. In response, the doctor emitted a strange noise from his mouth, confusing Talaran. "That's not a name. You just made a noise with your mouth," the researcher replied. "Why am I thinking of redactions? How can a word be redacted like that in a normal conversation?" Following this, the floor beneath James Talaran's feet disappeared, and he was swallowed by darkness, as SCP-3999 continued bending reality to make him suffer. What followed were multiple failed attempts from Talaran to either escape from the entity or nullify its abilities to warp reality. SCP-3999 had, at a later point, trapped Talaran in a stage play version of itself. As James frantically tried to escape out of a nearby door, where he hoped to find reality, he was met with a solid wall. "I'm trapped in whatever this place is with this thing, and there's no outside reality anymore," he realized. Researcher Talaran tried to understand the entity, but SCP-3999 defied description. It was simply chaos. In his desperation, Talaran was able to dig a tiny hole in the floor through which he could see a light. Filled with thoughts of his beloved family, his colleagues, and the rest of the world that had once existed, he opened the hole wider. It is unclear what happened after this, but it is apparent that James Talaran was still unable to escape SCP-3999. However, as the situations he found himself in grew increasingly strange, James Talaran was able to take greater control of his predicament. This is evidenced in the Foundation's document regarding SCP-3999. Researcher Talaran cannot be contained by this. Researcher Talaran will fight his way back. Researcher Talaran will recontain SCP-3999. This torture had gone on long enough, and researcher James Talaran was determined to be free of the creature that had taken such sick pleasure in his pain. Talaran at one point was able to subdue SCP-3999, although it is initially unclear how he accomplished this. There were several attempts made to contain the entity, using a recursive joke, a melon, the graves of American crime novelist Robert B. Parker, or an O5 council member, and a roach motel. It is believed that every single one of these attempts failed. Attempting to beat the creature at its own game, Talaran tried to turn SCP-3999's reality-altering powers against it by imagining the entity as something easier to subdue. These included several moldy blankets, a murderous penguin, and a pillow. Eventually, Talaran was able to contain SCP-3999 with the aid of 48 trained containment personnel, all of whom were also Researcher Talaran. During this time, a conversation between the two were partially recorded, although any dialogue from SCP-3999 suffered from data corruption. Claiming to finally be in charge and in control of the situation, Talaran interrogated SCP-3999, berating the creature for keeping him prisoner. "You can't frighten me anymore. For the first million years of nonsensical containment procedures and tortures and dream logic, it was the worst pain I had ever felt, but I survived. For the second million years, it was still the hardest thing I had ever done, but I survived. By the third million years, I was growing numb." The researcher tried to ascertain the exact nature and origin of SCP-3999, but to no avail. Vowing to fight the entity, Talaran told it, "Here's the thing about horror and weirdness.
The more you reveal of it, the less effect it has. I am sick of your horror. I am sick of you."
Afterwards, he was melted into goo for 5 years. It appears that shortly after this, researcher Talleyrand managed to understand how to destroy SCP-3999. While the entity was immortal and virtually unstoppable, he realized its weakness, that it had to bond to another being in order to survive. Upon discovering this, Talleyrand took his own life, causing all that SCP-3999 had done to disappear. After Foundation researcher James Talleyrand committed suicide, reality reverted to its original state before SCP-3999 had heavily altered it. His death freeing reality from the evil entity once and for all. The Foundation remains unaware of what SCP-3999 was or indeed is, and one can only guess as to why the entity subjugated Talleyrand to such terror and horror. What made this powerful reality bender hold such a perverse fixation on one man? Some have likened the creature to a horror writer, continually subjugating a character to all manner of nightmares before deciding to redraft and try something new. Whatever it was, SCP-3999 carries with it a warning that reality isn't always as it seems. A veteran worker of the SCP Foundation sits at his terminal, performing one of the most critical tasks in the entire organization, creating a file for an as-yet undescribed SCP. But there's something terribly wrong. His eyes are glazed over, his mouth hangs open. Is this a zombie or a trained Foundation researcher? What is going on? Like any large international organization, it takes more than just the exciting, action-filled jobs to keep the wheels turning at the SCP Foundation. Sure, the head researchers, guards, mobile task force soldiers, and members of the O5 Command get all the praise, but a legion of number crunchers, cleaners, and paper pushers are equally important. One such person was archivist Walter Bainbridge, who had been tasked with digitizing some of the older records that the Foundation had on file. It was when he was innocently recording the details on SCP-050 through 060 that he first came under the strange and startling effects of SCP-055. But the most peculiar part, as with all incidents of SCP-055's anomalous effects taking hold, is that Walter had no idea any of it was happening. In his new digitized filing system, he first took note of SCP-053, Euclid class, also known as the Young Girl. This anomaly was a seemingly normal human female child who provoked homicidal insanity in those directly exposed to her. Then SCP-054, Safe class, a non-aggressive humanoid female made entirely of, as well as biologically and chemically identical to regular spring water. Next, SCP-056, Euclid class, a being that changes form to suit its environment, but only when all observers lose focus of it. And then SCP-057, Safe class, an underground chamber that crushes the humans who walk within. It was at this point that Walter received a concerned message from one of his superiors at Site-19, Mr. Kovac. The message praised the thorough digitization of the other anomalies records, but was confused about why Walter had left out any mention of SCP-055. Immediately, Walter was embarrassed. How could he have forgotten SCP-055, that iconic anomaly known for... well, he couldn't quite say off the top of his head, but he'd be sure to look into it. A quick trip to the Site-19 archive showed him that there was actually quite a hefty file on the nature of SCP-055, which must have been the result of a huge number of studies. What struck him as strange was that all the files were filled out in pen rather than being typed up like a traditional file. The majority of these notes were written in shorthand too, as though they were frantically taken during the tests themselves on extremely short notice. There weren't even any redactions. Walter made a mental note of what he had seen, put the file back in its proper place, and headed back to his computer terminal. However, after writing in an almost trance-like state, he looked back on his work to see that he had written an entry on SCP-058, a giant evil bovine heart with insect legs and a scorpion stinger. Strange, he thought. That's when Walter got a call from Mr. Kovac on his Foundation issue phone, and he didn't sound happy. He'd given Walter direct instructions to go back and digitize the files on 055, and instead he'd been working on 058. What was the meaning of this? Walter was typically an extremely loyal and diligent employee, but the verbal barrage from his supervisor had him considering talking back, just this once, and hoping it didn't get him demoted to D class and thrown into 682's acid bath for playtime. Walter gulped, picked up some courage, and interrupted Mr. Kovach's rant to ask if he had any idea what SCP-055 actually was. The line went silent for a moment, then his supervisor spoke again, this time with less confidence.
Of course I can tell you about SCP-055. It's a classic, one of the first 100. How could you forget it's, I think it's the one with,
Another long pause as Mr. Kovach seemed to search for the words, but instead just trailed off into silence. Knowing that some of the anomalies on file were dangerous mimetic hazards, Walter was worried for a moment that he may have accidentally killed his boss by getting him to think too hard about SCP-055. He asked if Mr. Kovach was okay, and finally got a reply.
I'm sorry, I seem to have zoned out for a second there. What were we talking about again?
But this time it was Walter who couldn't answer. He had no idea at all what the two of them were discussing just moments ago. He felt disoriented and kind of sick, like they'd taken some low-level amnestics. Mr. Kovach told Walter to get back to his filing duties, and they'd speak later. Walter then checked the messages he'd received from Mr. Kovach earlier, and there it was, plain as day. You missed 055. Go back and digitize that before proceeding, Mr. K. But Walter had never even heard of an SCP-055 if such an anomaly even existed. What was going on here? In that moment, Walter realized he was dealing with something much stranger than just a standard digitization job. After all, how could he properly complete his duties if SCP-055 seemed to be impossible to speak, write, or even think about, unless you were directly observing it at that moment? Walter had to know, and ask around the entirety of Site-19 to find the answers if he had to. Sadly for Walter, he was about to embark on a much more challenging task than he could have ever imagined. To paraphrase a supposed quote from Socrates, "All I know is that I know nothing." And that's also about the extent of the knowledge we have on SCP-055, also known as the anti-meme and the self-keeping secret. What does it look like? When and how was it obtained by the Foundation? What are its anomalous abilities? Is this thing dangerous? We may never know, because the only anomalous ability of SCP-055 that we're aware of is the fact that nobody is capable of retaining any information about it. It's crucial to note that whatever 055 is, it isn't invisible or indescribable. Foundation personnel are perfectly capable of entering its containment chamber and observing it without incident. But mere minutes after leaving the chamber, any memories of the particulars of 055 seem to spontaneously erase themselves. Hence, the self-keeping secret. But this didn't deter Walter. Perhaps his greatest advantage was that he didn't know enough about the thing he was investigating to know how futile his mission was. He wanted to know the unknowable. And a pesky issue like impossibility wouldn't stop him. He'd get to whoever he needed to at Site-19 to get the answers he needed. Of course, most people had no knowledge of the mysterious anomaly. The common response he got back from his colleagues was, 055? Do we even have a 055? While the realization of sudden memory loss, or the realization of 055's existence, has been known to cause momentary stress, there are no known long-term physical or mental effects from 055's anomalous abilities. It's a fleeting idea in its purest form, like forgetting why you walked into a room. 055 could be the most harmless object on the Foundation's roster, or the most deadly. Either way, we just don't know. At times, Walter worried he was going insane. 055 and everything related to it was gaslighting him. Was 055 even real? The one thing that proved to him that 055 must have existed is that its containment chamber existed. According to the official records kept by the Foundation on the Site-19 containment facilities, 055 is kept in a 5x5 by 2.5 meter square room, constructed of 50-foot thick cement, with a Faraday cage surrounding the cement walls. The report continues that access is via a heavy containment door measuring 2 by 2.5 meters, constructed on bearings to ensure door closes and locks automatically unless held open deliberately. 055 cell is one of the few to have no posted security guards, and any personnel working on other SCPs in the area are ordered to remain at least 50 feet from the geometric center of 055 cell, where the anomaly itself is kept. When he tried to explore further why the cell was constructed in this manner, he found that, surprise surprise, nobody knew. 055 was an anomaly whose containment requirements were so mysterious that it automatically netted itself a Keter class designation. After all, how can you properly contain something you can't even hope to comprehend? There were plenty of rumors about the true nature of 055. Some of the more conspiratorial minds at Site-19 theorized that 055 was actually an autonomous or remotely controlled spy inserted into the site to observe Foundation operations, or even humanity as a whole. If you're on the more paranoid end of the psychological spectrum, this theory makes total sense. An anomaly that's physically impossible to remember, even when writings and pictures on the subject exist, would be a perfect spy. However, this was all ultimately little more than speculation. Walter was barely any further along than when he started. There were multiple points in his investigations where Walter seriously considered giving up, until finally, he had a major breakthrough. Dr. Bartholomew Hughes and Dr. John Marichek were two scientists that had performed extensive research into 055, and who, Walter hoped, might have the answers he sought about the self-keeping secret. These scientists were the first to discover the anti-memetic nature of 055, performing numerous tests on D-Class personnel to see if it was possible to create feasible written records, sketches, or any other records or impressions that could bypass its anomalous effects. The disorienting, memory-ruining effects of 055 also extend to any materials concerning 055. It seems to be a truly uncrackable code, but Dr. Hughes may have finally found some cracks in the armor. For starters, the fact that we're able to remember that 055 is an anti-memetic is an ironic exception to its anti-memetic qualities. This revelation also inspired another realization from Dr. Hughes. Would it be possible to discover more about 055 from the process of deduction rather than the typical induction? In other words, could they possibly learn about 055 by figuring out all the things it isn't rather than what it is? Dr. Marichek designed an experiment with Dr. Hughes to explore this theory. They designed the experiment around a simple question: is 055 not spherical? In designing the question to specifically find out what 055 isn't, they hoped to subvert the anomaly's anti-memetic powers. Walter was fascinated by this potential method of getting answers. Marichek and Hughes found that, while the questioning process for those exposed was often arduous and frustrating, they could now definitely say that 055 is not a sphere. It is theoretically possible to discover the true nature of 055 by an almost endless barrage of deductive questions, though whether Command would authorize the resources for such extensive testing is still an open question. Walter, in his desperation, begged Marichek and Hughes for clearance to view 055 himself. The curiosity had become too great during his search to just walk away with the single fact that 055 wasn't spherical. He needed to see this thing. And after several weeks of filling out forms and cutting red tape, his wish was finally granted. Walter Bainbridge was allowed a private audience with SCP-055, the subject of his months-long obsession. Outsiders observed that Walter spent just over an hour in the containment chamber, taking photos, drawing sketches, writing down notes, recording audio logs, and reciting memory mnemonics. He was pulling out every stop to counteract the anti-memetic effects of the self-keeping secret. He was adamant that he would not be defeated by his non-spherical nemesis, not after all this time and effort. Once his time in the 055 containment chamber was over, he retired back to his office to finally digitize his exhaustive findings, so that his supervisor, Mr. Kovac, would finally get off his back. Walter smiled, took a deep breath, and began to type. SCP-059, Keter class. This anomaly is a radioactive mineral that emits a unique radiation known as delta radiation. Exposure to this radiation has caused strange fungal growths on the infected... Wait, what was this supposed to be about again? Oh well, it couldn't have been that important. What is your favorite word? Think about it for a moment. Think real hard. Write it down in the comments, posted for everyone else to see. How many letters does it have? How many syllables? Say it aloud. How does it sound? How does it feel on your tongue? Really, really think about it. Now make sure you keep that word in mind. It's important, and we'll come back to it later. For now, it's time to talk about SCP-3449. Look, there's really nothing any special about this one. It wasn't even important enough to be mentioned with the other info hazards. It's not an evil talking toaster, that's for sure. SCP-3449 appears to just be a standard spiral notebook. Notebook? It's supposed to be notebook, right? Anyway, it's just a standard spiral notebook with a dark blue cover. It's safe class, and it's stored in the standard containment locker in Site-19. There aren't any other containment requires, but testing is currently underway to determine, I think it's meant to be determine, long-term containment requirements.
This is a mess.
Anyway, this item and its anomalous power is actually considered so inconsequential that researchers have explored the possibility of putting it on the anomalous items log, a place where items too useless to warrant a full file ends up. Jeez, how do you misspell up that badly? It's 2 letters. Well, it's supposed to be 2 letters. How did you work Z into that? They aren't even close to each other on keyboard.
Man.
Anyway, the notebook contains mostly blank pages. Some are torn and only 6 contain actual writing. But due to the formatting of the writing, the text, consisting mainly of diary entries, is almost unreadable. This is due to syntactical errors, random capitalization, and rampant misspellings? Great, you misspelled misspellings. How cute. Apparently, all attempts to correct these misspellings fail, or even lead to additional misspellings. This anomalous effect extends to anyone attempting to write... Yep, that was spelled R-I-G-H-T. Anyone attempting to write about SCP-3449, including the script for this video, apparently. There are no further notable anomalous properties. Tests are ongoing, though those with any inquiries about testing SCP-3449 should contact lead researcher Nicolo Gurdnell. The notebook, which was misspelled even worse this time, impressive, was first recovered by MTF Epsilon 6, also known as the Village Idiots, after a series of info-hazardous and cognito-hazardous phenomenon were discovered in the Pittsburgh metro area. The source seemed to be a storage unit filled with anomalous items, and SCP-3449 was amogus. I think that's meant to be among them. The storage unit was registered to a man by the name of Edward Selsborough, currently designated as Porpoise of Interest 4335. Whew, that's the end of that. Thanks for watching the video, folks. Now go check out... Oh, wait, there's more. Phenomenal. Let's keep going. Apparently, that version of the file was an older one. Let's check the next one and see if that's any more useful. Oh my. It appears that the updates here are actually quite extensive. Okay, let's give this another try. SCP-3449 is a Euclid-class SPC kept in the Humanid containment cells of Site-19. Items affected by it are kept in standard storage lockers for safe-class anomalous objects at the same site. The primary reason for this shift is that SCP-3449 has changed its object of designation. It is no longer the spiral notebook. It is now a 34-year-old Caucasian man known as Edward Selsborough, formerly known as Person of Interest 4335. He is believed to be the creator of the notebook, as well as other objects found in the storage looker in Pittsburgh. Foundation personnel are now trying to locate and contain any other objects created by Mr. Selsborough, though success has been limited on this front. That was cute. SCP-3449's analogous abilities manifest onto both Edward himself and all the objects created by him. Reading about him or any of these objects will result in syntactical errors, arbitrary capitalizations, and rampart misspellings. Attempts to revise or correct the writing will either fail to remove the errors or create new errors. It appears that the anomalous effects of SCP-3449 proper are more severe than that of the ones caused by his anomalous objects. MTF-6, also known as the Village Idiots, apprehended SCP-3449 in his apartment just outside of Pittsburgh. He appeared to be in an advanced state of disorientation and dehydration. Records collected by the Mobile Task Force found that Mr. Selberg had not left his apartment in over 10 days, which would account for his dire health conditions. Selberg did not communicate with members of the Mobile Task Force, but did not reset arrest and subsequent containment either. Okay, these spellings are rough, but I'm going to try and power through. I am a professional, and we're almost there. The following is the full log of items obtained from SCP-3449's storage look car that also exhibit his anomalous effects. The notebook, as already discussed, the pages are either blank, torn, or illegible. Selberg's computer. Files saved on this device include spreadsheets dealing personal finances, ideals for products, and an unfinished horror novel that is almost unreadable due to the poor quality of its writing. Grocery list had only 2 written items. Booter was spelled with only 1 T, and medication, which was spelled medication. A planner. Last entry was dated 2 weeks before containment and believed to contain reminders to perform various chores. However, a mixture of poor handwriting and word choice allows for other interpretations. And finally, Mr. Selberg's cell phone. Foundation researchers were also able to collect the call logs in hopes of further tracking Selberg's pre-containment activities. The last 3 calls, which were all made on the same day 2 weeks before containment, dialed different numbers, only one of which was in use. The Foundation made contact with the receiver of said call, who had no knowledge of SCP-3449, and claimed that they did not answer the call. Lead researcher Nicolo Gurdinel conducted the first interview with SCP-3449 shortly after his capture. When he entered the interview chamber, he found that SCP-3449 was just sitting in the corner, with his head in his hands, rocking back and forth in what appeared to be apparent distress. He then began looking down into his lap and twiddling his thumbs like a child. Nicolo engaged him in a calm and polite tone, addressing him as SCP-3449. The anomaly made eye contact with Dr. Gurdinel, but he didn't respond, and instead continued staring at him. As Gurdinel asked further questions, Selberg simply didn't answer, or would, at the very most, acknowledge the questions with simple gestures. Gurdinel asked whether Selberg was making products for his business, to which he smiled and shook his head. Gurdinel then asked Selberg whether he could speak or not, or if it was merely a choose on his part. Unsurprisingly, Selberg offered no explanation, and the interview came to a close shortly afterwards. Tests are still ongoing to find out if Selberg's inability to speak or communicate come as a result of his anomalous traits, or if this is simply a result of apophonia, an uncommon but non-anomalous condition that renders its victims unable to speak. Tests have confirmed that Selberg does have all the organs required for vocalization, but appears to not use them. Further tests are required. Alright, there we have it. That was a complete nightmare to read thanks to SCP-3449's anomalous effects, but at least it's over now. Now, go check out... Wait, there's more. Another update to the file. Good, okay. Alright, let's go take a look. Oh, I see. This is a lot more dangerous than I thought. I suppose I better read on. SCP-3449 has been upgraded to Keter Class Anomal. SCP-3449-A, the new designation for Edward Selberger, is to be kept in a high-security hazmat containment in Site-19. The inanimate anomalous possessions of Edward Selberg are to be kept in standard object containment. Any reports written on SCP-3449 must be rotten by people who have been exposed to it for less than 7 days in order to keep the files rateable. To prevent this infectious info hemorrhage from spread further, the number of people allowed to interact with this anomaly is kept relatively small and consists of those that have already been exposed at some point or another. This includes O5-8, MTF Epsilon 6, Dr. Teller's research team, some additional personnel selected for XPC-3449 research, and personnel chosen to update SCP-3449 documentation. Some additional personnel selected for XPC-3449 research and personnel chosen to update SCP-3449 documentation. While Edward Salzberg and his personal effects are chronically locked up, SCP-3449 is not currently considered contained. Research into the spread of SCP-3449's effects, the vectors for transmission, and any potential remedies for its degenerative effects are now top priority for all involved before this whole thing gets out of hand. Further research has taught the Foundation that not only are Salzberg and his items powerful info hazards, their anomalous effects appear to be able to infect these who experience them permanently. Initially, it will appear that writing quality only degrades when the subject is actually writing about SCP-3449 itself, but over time they'll come to the frightening realization that it actually affects their writing as a whole. The effect also progresses in its severity over time, eventually rendering the victim's ability to write legible sentences completely destroyed. The initial anomalous effects of SCP-3449 were discovered when MTF Epsilon 6 writes their field reports on the matter and found it littered with syntactical error, random capitalization, and rampant impellings. Similar errors appearing in the initial fail about SCP-3449 only serve to reaffirm this observation. However, researchers only began to notice true extent of SCP-3449's effects when the Village Idiot's field reports concerning other Solomines came in with equally atrocious writing. Attempts to correct this writing simply led to more mistakes and frustration on part of team. Soon after, a researcher named Dr. Teller, who'd since taken over the SCP-3449 case, and his team found that they were experiencing similar issues. They couldn't just make the blurs happen, no matter how hard they concentrated. They forgot spellings. They couldn't make hand move in the manner they waited to in order to form the words. Even the most intelligent and articulate members of the team came across as extremely young children on page, but didn't stop there. Wasn't long before researchers who'd never worked on the SCP-3449 case started to exhibit these same suspicious errors in own writing. The Foundation didn't know how, but this slickness was starting to spread, with people's abilities to write degrading across the entire Foundation. That's when a Foundation web trawler picked up something even more disturbing. Global literacy seemed to be taking a dive. The telltale syntactical error, random to capitalization, and rampant linguistic misspellings ticking up everywhere and for everyone. And the end of writing would be one thing, but SCP-3449 doesn't stop there. No, that's just the beginning. Morse code go next, then pictograms, not long for sign language become hopeless scrambled. Communication breaks down little by little. People can't draw anymore, can't move right hands. Call goes, calls, codes. Last go, his voice. Talking gets hard. Remember favorite word? Think about it, say it loud. When SCP-3449 done, when everyone infected, you'll never say again. Nobody will ever say again.
Salvation, Indiana was your typical Midwestern American town. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where everyone was comfortable leaving their doors unlocked at night, where there was a sense of trust between neighbors that you couldn't find in a more populated area. The kind of place where word traveled fast, and where people talked about things that were improper in hushed voices behind the backs of others.
In Salvation, being an outsider or deviating from the norm was akin to complete isolation. You either fit in or you got out. And if you didn't, Salvation had its ways of making you conform to the mold. Gossip, organized stalking efforts, discrimination. These small-town methods were often employed by the town's inner circle to keep those who they had a distaste for in check. And unfortunately, this cliquish mentality can be the norm when it comes to small towns. There's nothing anomalous about the ugliness of human nature. But Salvation did have its secrets. The kind that, if brought to light, would tear a small town apart. The kind that attracted the attention of the US government's Unusual Incidents Unit, a branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that dealt with the paranormal and supernatural, the US government's answer to the SCP Foundation. Between June 18th and June 23, 1976, the town of Salvation, Indiana underwent swaths of extreme anomalous activity that affected the town's entire population, but was mainly centered around Salvation's high school, appropriately named, well, Salvation High School. 2 UIU agents were dispatched to Salvation to assess the reports of anomalous activity, record it, and of course, help cover it up. This was one of the few times the UIU got the jump on an anomalous incident before a larger, more prominent organization such as the SCP Foundation or the Global Occult Coalition. Bet they got a company pizza party for that one. The operation went smoothly, with the agents using an early amnestic labeled Chemical 110 to wipe the memories of the townsfolk after interviewing them. Although in later years, study of Chemical 110 would prove it to be incredibly dangerous, as the amnestic was both toxic and had a degrading, damaging effect on human memory centers. Between this and the Foundation's early amnestic models also proving to be incredibly dangerous, the 1970s were an interesting time indeed in the field of supernatural cover-up operations. The timeline of events the agents established depicted an eerie scene. It was only a few days, but what occurred was both horrifying and strange. On Sunday night, 10th grade students at Salvation High School reported hearing what they described as someone trying to speak under the ground while passing by the school on their way home from a church service. One student reported it to her mother, who ignored it entirely. On Monday, an 11th grade student of Salvation High School claimed during gym class that he could hear voices coming from underneath the school's pool. Several other students corroborated this story. When school officials came to investigate, they didn't find anything unusual, but the UIU agents found that the lining of the bottom of the pool was cracked. On the same day, several female students reported seeing faceless things instead of their own reflections in a bathroom mirror. They did not seem bothered by this. During lunch announcements, many students described being able to hear a third voice alongside the 2 other students speaking unintelligibly below the broadcast. Curiously, the agents found that the PA room, where the broadcast originated from, sat in a media center near the pool. On Tuesday, students arriving at school noticed that the Indiana state flag was more than 3 meters above the top of the flagpole, attached to nothing, just floating. The American flag was not found, and more importantly, the students claimed they could see 9 female figures hanging by ropes from the flagpole, who disappeared immediately after being seen. During a biology class, one student suddenly stood up and rolled their eyes to the back of their head. They descended suddenly into the floor and disappeared entirely. Shortly after, they reappeared above a ceiling panel in the center of the room. No other students were able to identify the student, and several of their classmates insisted that their actions were just a joke. The UIU agents were unable to find proof of the student's existence in Salvation's enrollment records. Similarly, students described yet another student they didn't recognize walking the halls of the high school. They were unable to define any details of their appearance, save for one thing that stood out. They wore a purple satchel with the word syncope embroidered on the side. A custodian reported seeing something staring at him, standing at the bottom of the school pool. On Wednesday, the horror only sped up, as school staff noted that there was a full 2 inches of water across all levels of the school. For whatever reason, the school's principal decided not to close the school. At 7:56 a.m., the entirety of the student body heard an unknown voice whisper the word "hello" in their right ear. Members of the school band realized their instruments no longer produced any sound, but whenever they played, they reported seeing a small, black, human-shaped entity flickering in and out of view in the corner of the room, facing the wall. One student saw a dark figure walking up and away from the school through the air at an impossible angle. Eventually, the figure disappeared from her sight and was never seen again. No other student addressed this. On Thursday, a student in gym class avoided a dodgeball as it phased through his body. He sunk into the floor screaming for help. Nobody who noticed seemed motivated enough to help him. The entire school shifted roughly 1 foot off of its foundations at 11 a.m. The vice principal, who was sent to inspect the building's integrity, described seeing something small with too many faces grinning at him from underneath the building before the school inexplicably resettled back to its original position. The boys' locker rooms disappeared and were replaced with what witnesses described as something that screamed. They were unable to provide any details. As students left for the day, they saw 9 young women hanging in the air, tilted forward at an angle above the school's parking lot. They could be silently mouthing words, and their appearances were described by witnesses as ugly and unremarkable. They vanished, and again the majority of the town residents reported hearing a child's voice say the word hello below them upon the figure's disappearance. A panic ensued, as town officials had no explanation for these events. Salvation's principal made the call to close the school on Friday. However, when Friday morning arrived, the entire student body showed up for school. The building was locked, so the students simply waited outside to be let in. No individuals could describe why they were there. There was a knock on a window, and the students saw a small black entity standing outside of a second-story classroom. An entity phased in and out of the school's windows over and over until suddenly disappearing. After this, the front door unlocked itself, and the mass gathering of students entered the building. However, what they found was unlike the small school they had come to know over the years. Inside, Salvation High School was transformed into a non-Euclidean space, meaning that reality didn't work inside it the way it should. Hallways that led right instead led downward. Stairs that went up instead curved left. As the students moved through the school, they couldn't help but feel like they were always moving down, lower and lower. Some heard whispers, others heard drums in the distance. As they approached the basement, they saw a massive stone archway. Suddenly, the students shifted, encasing the entire group in rock and earth for 20 seconds. After this brief, suffocating torture ended, the students reappeared back in the school, except this time, every one of them reported being the only one in the building. They described the experience wandering the building alone before coming to what they called a doorway below a doorway, and ended up inside a small sub-basement room. There they saw 3 mysterious visions. A woman crouched over a body of water, surrounded and covered in blood. A farmhouse and a group of trees that were burning. 9 white humanoid figures floating in the air overhead. A weeping woman digging in a field until her hands began to rot and fall apart. When these visions subsided, the black entity reappeared again. It whispered hello, and the group of students were suddenly surrounded by 9 screaming female figures. After this, the students reappeared inside their own homes. It was at this point that the UIU began to enter the town to distribute amnestics to the subjects. More anomalous activity was recorded in rapid succession. Bodies hanging in the sky, water taps leaking human hair and mucus instead of water. Individuals reported that their facial features had disappeared entirely. Others reported seeing faceless creatures in the town. The black entity frantically appearing and reappearing in rapid succession throughout the town. Even a weeping young woman running back into the school's building, who witnesses lost after she entered the school's basement. The cover-up effort was brutal, but it worked. The townspeople of Salvation were convinced that they saw hallucinations as a result of toxic gases blown south from a factory up north. But what was the connection between all the phenomena? 9 faceless female entities, water, and blood. Something that literally upsets the entire foundation of Salvation High School. A small black entity. Adults in the town ignoring the things their children saw and acting indifferent toward them. All this sounds a lot like a dirty, dark secret being unearthed in the town of Salvation. Something people would rather turn a blind eye to and ignore. But they couldn't, because the terror was only getting started. A week after these events occurred, contractors assessing the damage to the school discovered the sub-basement room, where the students had various visions of anomalous entities. Behind it was the entrance that led to the large stone archway. This antechamber was discovered after one of the members of the contracting team slipped and fell beneath a collapsed section of wall and floor that led to the massive area underneath the school. The contracting team attempted to extract them, but they did not succeed. Their disappearance caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who assessed the school and deemed the area beneath the school to be anomalous, as the building's architecture should not be able to accommodate the size of the area. It was designated SCP-3935, and as the Foundation began investigating it, they were determined to uncover the truth of what really was occurring in Salvation, Indiana. While exploring SCP-3935, they came across the stone archway, a piece of architecture whose origins are unknown. Inscribed on the arch was a phrase that read,
"The way below winds deeper, longer, unspeakable its patterns laid, the lost forever damned to wander, this thing a quiet madness made."
After the initial establishment of SCP-3935 as an anomalous location, the Foundation poured deeper into Salvation's mystery and came across the documents created by the UIU agents. The Foundation, being much more thorough in their containment methods than the UIU, decided that the small town of 1,400 people was easy enough to relocate entirely, and the entire area could be condemned, feeding into the excuse of a hazardous waste facility nearby, leaking noxious gases into the town's water and air supply. With the townsfolk successfully relocated, Salvation was quarantined and cut off from the rest of the world. Roads were removed and rerouted, and Foundation personnel turned over any trespassers to local authorities. Salvation High School became a hub for Foundation researchers studying SCP-3935 and the events that occurred in the town, and the building was heavily guarded when not in use by the organization. The initial exploration attempt into SCP-3935 was conducted by a team of Foundation agents, shortly after members of the contracting team were lost. There was a slight hope they could be recovered, and the effort was dubbed a search and rescue mission. 3 agents, Ellis, Porter, and Haskell, were tasked with entering SCP-3935, all equipped with recording equipment and a shoulder-mounted lamp system. They entered a cramped, narrow space beyond the archway, where the subterranean stone walls got tighter and tighter, and the air felt stuffy and uneasy. On the walls, images resembling a child's drawings were carved into the rock. As the teams continued to push through the rock tunnel, they found it difficult to breathe. The walls were getting narrower, too close for comfort. Suddenly, Porter's voice cut out, and his camera feed went black. When it came back, it appeared to be looking up at 2 sources of light, most likely the other 2 agents' lamps, as Porter fell from a great distance. His screaming was heard on both the cameras and by the other agents, but they couldn't figure out where he was. Ellis and Haskell began to panic, moving faster and attempting to struggle forward. The rock tunnel was so tight, so constraining, that they were unable to move more than a few steps in a second. After a short period of time, both men fell forward into a larger open space. As they searched for Porter, who wasn't behind them, they came to the conclusion that he must have fallen into a ravine or slipped beneath the rocks. There was no other explanation for how he disappeared so suddenly, but their talk was cut short when they realized what was in front of them. They hadn't noticed it at first, but when they turned their lamps forward, they noticed a gigantic structure, seemingly carved out of stone. It resembled Salvation High School almost perfectly. The main entrance was visible, and the windows too, a stone replica of the school, hidden in this massive underground area. The agents couldn't believe it. There was a thick layer of fog in front of them, but they could make out a narrow stone bridge that extended across a large chasm, leading to the stone replica of the school. As they examined further, they noticed that underneath the school was another model of the school, and under that one was another. It went on indefinitely, extending deeper and deeper into the ground, in the direction that all things in Salvation seemed to go, down. On the other side of the bridge, hanging mid-air, were 9 female entities, their faces obscured by long white hair. The 2 agents stood still in fear. After a short time, the figures appeared 10 meters backwards, and then another 10, and then they appeared right in front of the door of the stone school structure. Slowly, they lifted their heads, revealing their featureless faces to the agents, who recoiled in fear. After that, they disappeared. The The two agents debated going back for reinforcements, but they pushed onward after hearing the sudden sound of many voices speaking in hushed tones in the distance. It could have been the lost contractors, or their lost man, Porter. They entered the stone school and began searching. Inside, they couldn't make heads or tails of the architecture. As they ran down the hallways, following the sound of the voices, they noticed that the halls seemed to stretch on forever, but they didn't seem to notice the watching, featureless faces who observed the agents from the window panes in the doorways. As the agents came to the auditorium doorway, Agent Haskell let out a scream, and his voice recorder disconnected. At this point, what occurred became nearly impossible to make out on the Foundation's recording. The voices grew louder. Haskell's camera shifted perspective to the floor. 9 female entities appeared around Agent Ellis, contorting their bodies into impossible positions. Haskell ran, but the entities pursued him. He screamed for help. Eventually, the figures hung in the air, unmoving. Haskell slowed down too and slowly turned around, coming face to face with a small black humanoid entity sitting upside down on the ceiling of the hallway. It whispered one word, "Hello." The feed cut out to the choppy sounds of audio distortion. A snapping noise was heard, and then silence. And then all 3 agents' feeds returned. For the duration of the exploration recording, Haskell, Ellis, and Porter lost their minds in the depths of SCP-3935. In between periods of silence, they laughed, screamed, and shouted incoherently, rambling on about how dark it is and how they can't go down any further, below, where it goes on forever, where they can be part of the 9, be a part of salvation, where they can fall forever. And after that, silence. The feed was cut out completely, and neither the trio nor the contractors were ever recovered. After this failed, horrifying exploration attempt, more anomalous activity occurred in the town during the Foundation's occupation. Sightings of the 9 faceless entities in the streets and the trees. An agent who saw the black figure constantly in his peripheral vision. Sounds coming from a grove of trees near the school, which led to a cabin and 9 corpses of former Salvation High School students in the backyard. But before they could investigate, the female entities appeared once more, and they were unable to locate the grove again. The Foundation's investigation of Salvation continued through the decades, interviewing former staff members of the school and residents. They were trying to piece together any semblance of a coherent story, to find a way to connect all these dissonant elements into something understandable. The black figure, the corpses, the buried secrets, and the 9 female entities. How did it all connect to the school? In 2002, a Foundation agent interviewed Mrs. Fletcher, an English teacher at Salvation High School during the period of anomalous activity in 1976. The interview started out ordinarily enough. Fletcher, in her old age, couldn't remember much. She remembered the town was quiet, with a tight-knit community. They didn't even need a police force because there was so little crime. She remembered students would go into the woods and chase ghosts, or claim they saw things, but it was never anything too strange. But as Fletcher continued to talk, she let her mind wander more and more. She recounted how there was a disappearance at the high school, a girl who was last seen by the school's pool. The town assumed she ran away. After all, there were some individuals who held strong opinions in Salvation, the kind of opinions that didn't sit right with some of the younger residents. The church was important in Salvation. Nearly everyone went. Fletcher opened up some more. There was a scandal, she recalled. A teenage girl on the school cheer team who ended up pregnant out of wedlock. She couldn't recall her name or what she looked like, but she remembered the town's inner circle was in an uproar about it. She didn't want them to know. She didn't want anyone to know. It was a secret she could barely keep from spreading. It must have been destroying her, Fletcher explained. She couldn't remember much about the girl, but she did remember that the girl would always say hello to her. Too many times, in fact. Eventually, the girl was found hanging in the woods, right outside of a log cabin. They found a note in her hand, which contained a drawing of a building that resembled the high school, and on its back, the repetition of the same word over and over again. But Fletcher couldn't recall what the word was. The Foundation agent was about to close the interview out, but he had one last thing to ask. He produced a picture of the unidentified 9 female figures that were haunting the town and showed it to Fletcher. She became noticeably pale and short of breath. "Do you know anything about this, Mrs. Fletcher?" the agent said. She collected herself and examined the image as best as she could, her hand shaking.
Why, yes I do. Those are, the cheerleaders. They were, well, let me think. There were 10 of them, though, I think. Unless something happened to one of them, there were definitely 10.
The Foundation didn't have to ask what happened to the 10th.
Senior researcher Dr. Victor Stafford had an obsession. He was one of the SCP Foundation's most brilliant minds. But right now, that mind was being twisted by grief and confusion. One of his closest friends and confidants at the Foundation, an anomalous astrophysics expert named Dr. Lilibeth Orion, had gone missing. Not killed, not kidnapped, truly disappeared without a trace. Back when Dr. Orion first fell off the map, Dr. Stafford had led the charge into the emergency investigation. It should come as a surprise to nobody that employee turnaround at the SCP Foundation is higher than perhaps any other organization on Earth. We've made whole videos about the various ways unfortunate Foundation operatives might die in the line of duty, but few things are worse than never having the closure of knowing what actually happened to your missing friend. Dr. Orion had experienced a tragedy almost a year before her mysterious disappearance. Her husband and young daughter were both killed in a car accident. Naturally, rumors spread that perhaps the grief had just gotten too much for the poor doctor, but Dr. Stafford wouldn't hear a word of it. Part of him knew that Lilibeth Orion was still alive, out there somewhere, but he needed to discover exactly what had happened to her. This is what sparked the obsession that would destroy his respectable Foundation career, and perhaps even his mind. He'd step beyond professional boundaries by accessing a number of deeply personal documents, including personnel files and Site-19 project histories. He read through reams of archival documentation concerning unexplained disappearances of Foundation personnel, including the disappearance of O5-7 several decades prior. Dr. Stafford's search went on for 20 years, still finding very little, except an arcane pattern of connection between each of those who disappeared. All were Foundation employees with 3 degrees of separation from one another, to put it very reductively. A huge number of disappearances, Dr. Lilibeth Orion included. He didn't know what was taking them or why, but he would bet his life on the belief that there was one force behind it all. And while Dr. Stafford had no real way of knowing, he was indeed right. Nearly 20 years prior, Dr. Orion found herself in a strange and unfamiliar place upon waking. A year before that, she lived in a 2-story suburban home, but after the deaths of her husband and child, she moved into an apartment in the city. That house just had too many empty spaces in it for her. But now she was neither in her old home nor her new apartment. She was in a rustic 2-level cottage somewhere in the countryside. Naturally, Dr. Orion first tried calling for help, but there was no cell phone signal and no Wi-Fi. After that, she tried fleeing the property on foot, only to encounter its first anomalous effect. Upon walking out of one edge of the property, you simply reappear entering the other. The house sat at the center of a half-mile of grassy land, cordoned off with a wholesome picket fence. A lonely swing sat near a tree in the yard. No matter how many times Dr. Orion tried to run past the confines of the building's land, she would appear facing the rustic little cottage once more. Next, she started yelling and calling for help. Nothing. Only birds and squirrels seemed to register her cries, and they ran away in fear. Nothing about the cottage suggested its location. Was she still even in the United States anymore? And the flat, distant, and uninhabited plain stretching out beyond her only served to confirm exactly what she feared. There would be nobody out there to help her. This would be a terrifying situation for anyone, but thankfully Dr. Orion's Foundation training allowed her to keep cool under pressure. She immediately switched into research and investigation mode. Perhaps there would be some key to her escape or rescue elsewhere in the cottage. Knowledge is power, and Dr. Orion certainly didn't like feeling powerless. The first and second floor of the cottage felt relatively conventional. Furniture, knickknacks, charming but slightly peeled wallpaper. Nothing about it was overtly anomalous. Soon, however, she detected a strange noise coming from the attic, like the slow chugging of an old machine. Upon climbing up there, she found a strange contraption made from wood and metal sitting in the corner of the attic, with a plaque affixed to the front. It also had several PVC pipes running out of it and feeding into the wall, off into an unknown location. Dr. Orion approached and studied the plaque. It read, "Please fill this machine once per day at noontime. We cannot arrive with as much haste if the machine runs dry. We hope you understand, and trust that you will keep your side of the arrangement now that we have kept ours. Thank you." How strange. She needed to investigate further. Down in the basement, she found another more anomalous element to the house. A large clump of strange, unidentifiable vegetation. It was largely a kind of murky green, with notes of red and purple that made it seem almost otherworldly. Strangest of all, when in the plant's proximity, she heard an odd, static-like noise coming off of it. It also intermittently let off a strange red pulse. It didn't take long for Dr. Orion to intuit that this pulse was actually Morse code, delivering two distinct messages on a loop. The first was, "Thanks for keeping the plants fed. Hit a snag in traffic. Might take a bit longer than expected." And the second was, "Please keep this hatch open only in good weather. Please keep it closed for rain, snow, and the chill of winter. Thank you." Just as the message suggested, there was a hatch in the ceiling up above, angled perfectly to allow daylight to filter through onto the alien vegetation whenever it was left open. The last notable thing that Dr. Orion found in the house was seemingly the least supernatural of the three, and yet the most anomalous, in the traditional sense of the word. It was a closed network SCP Foundation computer terminal, and a rather old model at that. She managed to boot it up and gain access with her login credentials, but what she saw definitely didn't bring her any comfort. She was currently trapped in the middle of what the victims of this place call SCP-2508. The first and most prescient piece of news was that this little predicament Dr. Orion found herself in was a life sentence. Only one person would ever be trapped here at a time, and they would remain here until they died, one way or another. All she could do in the meantime is work to maintain the house, and hope that whoever its owner was would someday return and give her some respite. That's when she found a final note left by 05-7. It read, "I was driving home when it happened. It was about a 30-minute commute through a lot of back roads and I was terribly drunk. It was one of those XK-class scenario averted let's celebrate occasions, so I didn't really hesitate to down more than my fair share of wine. When I arrived at my front porch, car askew so that the front tires dug into the dirt on my front lawn, I stumbled for the door. After a great amount of fidgeting, I managed to get my key in the lock and finally got the door open. But then when I looked around, it wasn't my house at all. It was this place. Dumbfounded, I went back outside. Surely I thought I had accidentally entered another house in my drunken stupor, but now not even the outside was as expected. The suburban-urban environment had shifted to a countryside. My car was still there, sitting on the asphalt road, which was now a dirt road. Everything was different, and it was never quite the same. That was all 23 years ago. No doubt my position as 05 was replaced long, long ago, and here I am, having found startlingly few answers. Every once in a while I'll find an old shoe or a photograph of someone who came before me, and I am reminded how we are all chained together in oblivious and obligatory service to this place. Lately the clouds keep rolling in, and the plants in the basement are buzzing more than usual. I hear the gurgling of water draining through the pipes and the walls from that old dusty machine, and sometimes I try to find where that water goes. I think it goes out beyond the house, into the grassy field in front of the swing set. When I lay on the grass, sometimes if I listen very closely and everything else is quiet, I swear I can hear noises coming from far below the ground. They sound like some kind of clockwork mechanism, its gears quietly humming. I don't know what it means, and I don't think I ever will. Undoubtedly, the most puzzling thing about this place is really quite a small feature. There's a computer terminal in the study, and it looks like one of the oldest things in the house. It's clearly from the Foundation, but it's unsettling, to say the least. We would have known about this if the Foundation knew, I'm sure. But if that's truly the case, then it still doesn't explain how the anomaly got its number designation. Is it arbitrary, or is it actually cataloged in the outside world? I don't think it's possible to know from here. Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for something, or for someone. It's not for someone to save me, but it's as if I'm waiting to meet someone here. I dream of what that meeting might be, or why it might be in the first place. But somewhere deep down I know that I will almost certainly die here, and this long wait will be passed down to another to continue waiting with bated breath for something. Though what exactly that something is, we can't be sure of. Maybe someday I'll learn how the food gets restocked. As she finished the note, Dr. Orion felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. She wasn't just trapped. She was the latest in a long line of trapped, doomed people who'd been confined and then perished in this lonely little cottage, keeping the place in shape while someone or something made its long journey back. If this was anything to go by, chances are she wouldn't be the last one to perish here after decades of waiting. As the months turned into years and the years turned into decades, Dr. Orion stuck it out. She learned some things about the place, things she assumed she might be able to pass on to others. Like the machine in the attic, the one that needs water every day is somehow tied to both the integrity of the cottage itself and its occupant. If not properly watered, the occupant will begin to grow sick and eventually start to die. Back on the outside, Dr. Victor Stafford was finally disciplined for his extracurricular investigations. He was stripped of all his titles and clearances for spending all his time searching into the mystery of Dr. Lilibeth Orion. The Foundation frankly had more important things to deal with. They thought Dr. Stafford was crazy. They had no idea how deep this mystery went, about how many Foundation operatives were taken, or most important of all, the fact that Stafford knew who would be taken next. Back in SCP-2508, things were different for Dr. Orion. Nearly 20 years had passed, and she was in a different stage of her life. To some extent, she'd come to terms with her new reality. When she dreamed of her old life, she would often wonder whether those dreams were her actual life, and her time in the cottage was just a dark, recurring nightmare. Maybe she'd die here someday, and let another take her place. Or maybe she wouldn't. Dr. Orion, you see, was always the curious type. Even if she did die here, she'd never let herself die without knowing what really happened at this strange little cottage. And even more importantly, what was happening under it.
One of the primary aims of the SCP Foundation is to contain the anomalies that they discover. Secure, contain, protect is their mission statement after all. However, there are some forces so unknowable and malevolent that there is no way to truly contain them. SCP-4205 is one such force. Very little is known about SCP-4205, even compared to other SCPs, many of which are mysterious by their very nature. We do not know what it is, we do not know what it wants, and we do not have any meaningful way to stop it. The best that can be done to protect yourself from it is to implement the few known preventative measures available and pray that it doesn't set its sights on you. The little information that exists on SCP-4205 was recorded by Wade Dalitz, a former junior researcher at the Foundation. He wrote the initial report on SCP-4205 on a computer, Terminal 4. Though his work was highly valuable and provided many previously unknown insights about the nature of the SCP, sadly his knowledge could not save him. The official entry on SCP-4205 was his final act before his death on December 11, 1992. Before we get deeper into that entry and Wade's final day on Earth, it's important to understand what SCP-4205 is, or at least understand the little we know about what it is. 4205 is a Keter-class SCP, meaning that it's incredibly difficult or complicated to contain. It also shows extreme hostility toward all life. It is described as an amber-colored pair of human-like eyes, with the ability to appear spontaneously in windows, mirrors, or any other glass or glass-like surface. One of the reasons so little is known about these eyes is that anyone who sees them dies within seconds. Much like the mythical basilisk, the gaze of SCP-4205 is deadly and inescapable. The eyes only seem to appear to people who are alone in a room, and never in places where there's more than one person. But aside from that, there is no way to predict where the eyes will appear. Since it is unknown if the eyes are part of a corporeal body or even present on this plane of reality, there is no way to contain them or stop them from killing. This brings us to that fateful day, December 11th, 1992. The day that the SCP Foundation would finally be given some tangible information on the mysterious amber eyes, at the cost of one of their researchers' lives. Wade Dalitz, a young man fresh out of his university studies, was brought on board as a junior researcher by Dr. Mark Forsyth, a senior researcher. Dr. Forsyth recruited Wade after giving a guest lecture at his university, and being impressed by Wade's keen observational skills, thirst for knowledge of the unexplained, and determination to understand that which seemed to defy explanation. After Wade graduated, he was recruited by Dr. Forsyth and given the position of junior researcher at the SCP Foundation, where he assisted Dr. Forsyth, now a site supervisor, in his research. After several months of working under Dr. Forsyth with minimal responsibilities, Wade was finally given the opportunity to write his first SCP report on SCP-4205. Following some initial documented appearances of 4205, Dr. Forsyth approved further research into the anomaly, with Wade appointed as the lead researcher on the subject. According to Wade's entry, he was responsible for the discovery of SCP-4205 when he spotted the anomaly in a window, though later reviews of security footage determined that he was not the first person to observe the eyes. He did claim to be the first to observe them and live to tell the tale. In his writing on the subject, Wade is puzzled by the fact that he survived his encounter with SCP-4205 and wonders what could have set him apart from the others that fell victim to its gaze. He found himself frustrated as he documented SCP-4205, his rough drafts of reports dissolving into angry rants about his own incompetence. Wayne had difficulty adjusting to his new responsibilities, especially with the added element of his assigned subject's mysterious and volatile nature. In between his reports on SCP-4205, its previous appearances, and its effects on its victims, he wrote letters to his father, desperate for reassurance that he was not messing everything up, letters that would sadly go unsent. In his coverage of SCP-4205, Wade made note of a troubling recurring element in each victim's death. When medical professionals attempted to revive the victims, it was always noted that their brain activities stopped much more quickly than in cases of death by natural causes. When examined, all aspects of the body aside from the brain were completely unharmed. The brain, however, showed massive nerve damage in the amygdala, hippocampus, medial temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. The appearance of this brain trauma had been compared to the effects of electrical shock or a severe head injury. In addition to Wade, 6 other people on record encountered SCP-4205. Every encounter ended the same way, with sudden brain death and severe nerve damage immediately after viewing the eyes in a reflective surface. The first encounter occurred on January 5, 1990, when Deputy Liaison Genna viewed the eyes in a reflective glass one-way window. Security tape reveals that the eyes appeared in the window 8 minutes before the Deputy Liaison spotted them. As soon as he did, he fell from his chair and immediately died. Though the specifics varied from case to case, the end result of every encounter was the same, with none surviving long enough to relate what they had experienced, every encounter except Wade's. As he continued his documentation of SCP-4205, Wade's mental state quickly began to deteriorate, the process of his mind coming apart and his thoughts giving way to confusion, fear, and anger at his own survival is documented in his reports on the SCP. He agonized over the questions of why he was able to survive gazing into the eyes of SCP-4205 when so many others had not. The question consumed him until he was unable to eat, sleep, or do anything but obsess over the SCP he was tasked with researching. As he became more agitated, he began to write about the eyes appearing to him again. On one occurrence, he attempted to touch them, and described the sensation like touching a balloon to your arm after it had been charged with static electricity. He continued to report seeing the eyes. The worst was when trying to sleep, during which he was overtaken by violent sleep paralysis and plagued with visions of the amber eyes. The only comfort Wade seemed to find was in memories of his loved ones. He wrote about his mother and his father, even as their memories grew foggier to him. He also mentioned a man by the name of Theodore Quayle, who he claimed was a researcher at the Foundation. Later fact-checking determined that this was not the case, and that Quayle must have been someone from Wade's past. He wrote about Quayle wistfully, mournfully, with words of love and loss, tormented by the sense that he was losing his grip on reality and everything he once held dear. As Wade descended deeper into a hell inside his own mind, he continued to mull over the questions of SCP-4205. Was there more to it than what was visible? Did it have a body? Why had he survived the encounter with it? And what did it want from him? He decided that those who had perished immediately were the lucky ones. They had escaped the torture that had overtaken his life. The eyes were everywhere now, watching him even as he attempted to unlock their secrets on a Foundation computer. He spoke to the eyes at one point, but refused to write down what they said to him. His last entry, his last thought, was a plea for Theodore Quayle's embrace. There is no more written about the research or about the eyes, only a simple, desperate need for a comfort that is long lost. Now is the part of our story where terror meets tragedy. Contrary to what Wade thought, and what was recorded in his final computer entries, he did not survive his brief brush with SCP-4205. The truth is that he spotted the amber eyes in the glass above his terminal monitor while recording the entry and died seconds later. Though his death was swift, it felt agonizingly slow, as revealed by his descent into panic and paranoia recorded in his writings. The entries recorded as a result of the connection Wade in the computer, his physical contact with it at the moment of exposure to SCP-4205's anomalous effects, allowing the terminal to archive his final thoughts before he succumbed to the deadly nature of the eyes. The entries were never physically typed, but rather jumped from his dying mind into the mainframe. His entries, the echoes of a dying mind, offer a glimpse into the way that SCP-4205 kills its victims. In the seconds leading up to death, the amber eyes fast-forward a person's mind, feeding on the electrical impulses that it gives off as it speeds through what seems to be days of fear and of a loosening grip on reality. The death may be swift, but the suffering is long. Wade left the Foundation with a digital fingerprint, an echo of the person he was at his core, in addition to his experiences with SCP-4205 itself. Wade spent his final moments terrified for his life, dreaming of a father that he missed and a long-lost love from his college days. His sacrifice must not be forgotten, because no one ever survives an encounter with SCP-4205. His documented final moments are the only first-hand account in existence. Junior researcher Wade Dalitz gave us a gift in death. He allowed the SCP Foundation a glimpse into the true horror of the amber eyes and a reminder of what they are capable of stealing from us. So be careful of windows, mirrors, screens, and all reflective surfaces. When you look into them, you never know what you might see looking back. Check out SCP-3008 Trapped in IKEA and SCP-5000 The Suit for more from the archives of the SCP Foundation.